Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar for the Australian British Chamber of Commerce in partnership with our great friends at the New South Wales wine industry, but also with the New South Wales government through Investment New South Wales. I'd like to particularly acknowledge Tess and Carla and the team over there at Investment New South Wales. This is part of a series of events that we're doing to help explain the FTA and get people excited about exporting to the UK. Probably not something you need to do a huge amount with the wine industry because we've got so many great New South Wales brands already represented in the market, but there's some great news on the FTA front, and there's some other issues that we'll cover, of course, I'm sure, during the course of the afternoon. We've got a limited amount of time, so rather than rub it on too much, we'll try and get on with the show. I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I'm here in Sydney on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to them and to their elders past, present and emerging, but also extend that to wherever you may be joining us from around New South Wales, and I know there are a few who have joined from other states as well, because this is a very important issue, particularly for this sector. Wine has been doing particularly well, and I'm pleased to see that. As a fan of Hunter Semillons and Shirazes, and a former employee of the Hunter Business Chamber, I certainly have a soft spot for the Newcastle region, but there are plenty of other great places, whether you like your cool climates from Orange, whether you like stuff from Griffith, whether you like it from down around Canberra. There's plenty of great places to make wine in New South Wales. So it's great to be able to support this event. Delighted to have Angus Barnes, the Executive Officer of New South Wales Wine Industry Association, joining us this afternoon. Great to see you again, Angus. And great to have Brendan Peace join us as well, who's the Director for Regional Trade Agreements of the Regional Trade Agreements Division at DFAT, and has been a key figure in the FTA coming along, and has also got some great information to share with us today. I'd like to acknowledge some of our sponsors that are joining us on the call today. Harrow Advisory. You'll note there's a great report that you'll see in your inboxes in the not too distant future, which gives a great outline of how businesses will be able to use the FTA, and it covers a whole range of different sectors and some great quotes and stories in there for you to reimagine what you might think of the UK market. But they also did a great summary piece for the Chamber when the FTA was signed back in December, and that's well worth reading as well. You can find both of those on our website. And we'll send them to you as part of the post-event email for this event as well. So I'll explain the format for today. I'll shortly pass to Brendan, who will address us. He'll give us about 10 minutes on what are the key benefits for the industry. After his presentation, I'll ask Angus Barnes to give an industry view of what that means. I'll then moderate a discussion with the speakers, but I very much encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A facility. I think we've all done this enough times that I don't need to show you, but it's down at the bottom of the screen. If you're on a laptop, you'll find it somewhere on the iPhone version or the whatever device you might be on. There is a Q&A feature. Please just type your questions in there, and we'll get to as many of those as we can in the time that we have available. Following that, Carla Lampier, the Acting Executive Director for Regional Trade Agreements. Carla, who is, sorry, I'm misreading my lines. It's dreadful. Carla Lampier, who is at Investment New South Wales, will give us a vote of thanks and wrap up the session. So thank you everyone for that. Right, let me get myself back in order. Brendan, if I may, I'll pass to you to kick off proceedings.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks very much for the invitation to attend today. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk about the UK Free Trade Agreement with industry, and it's always a pleasure to engage with industry because obviously that's why it is that we negotiate these agreements in the first place. So for those of you who I haven't met, I'm one of the directors in the FTA goods branch here at DFAT in the Regional Trade Agreements Division. I was one of the goods negotiating leads for the UK Free Trade Agreement, and with the exception of the EU agreement. I'm also the goods leads for most of our other free trade agreement negotiations, including the agreement with India. So that's my background. I thought today I'd just kick off with a bit of a general introduction about the UK Free Trade Agreement, and then move on to some of the specifics about wine. So, as many of you would know, the Free Trade Agreement was signed by the Trade, Tourism and Investment Minister Dan Tehan and the UK Secretary of State Anne-Marie Trevelyan on the 17th of December 2021. And in line with our domestic treaty processes, it's been tabled in both Houses of Parliament, along with the national interest analysis in February. And the procedure from here is that Joint Standing Committee on Treaties will consider the agreement and table a report, including a recommendation on whether binding treaty action should be taken. So I can come back to that at the end of the discussion in terms of what that means for the agreement entering into force. But in terms of the agreement itself, it's a gold standard agreement, and it's the most ambitious bilateral trade deal we've ever concluded, other than with New Zealand. So it's certainly a historic moment in our relationship with the UK that this agreement has been signed. Many of you would, I'm sure, be aware that our UK is Australia's fifth largest trading partner. So in 2020, two-way goods and services trade between Australia and the UK was valued at about 32 billion, just under. And so really the agreement represents a once-in-a-generation deal for our producers and consumers, and certainly contains commercially significant outcomes that will strengthen trade diversification opportunities and also COVID-19 recovery for both countries. So it obviously creates new export opportunities for jobs and business. And in terms of tariff elimination, it'll eliminate tariffs on over 99% of Australian goods exports to the UK, valued at around $9.2 billion when the agreement enters into force. So very significant agreement indeed. This includes elimination of tariffs on Australian wine, but the agreement also opens up opportunities on other key exports such as beef, sheep meat, dairy, rice and sugar, among others. Stepping outside of goods for a moment, Australia's service companies and professionals will also benefit from new commitments that will make it easier to operate in the UK market. So they'll include things like provisions to support mutual recognition of professional qualifications, which will deliver greater certainty for skilled professionals entering the UK labour market, and expanded opportunities for cross-border provision of financial services, and provisions to address behind-the-border barriers to financial services trade. So building on our very deep people-to-people links, including historic links with the UK, the Free Trade Agreement will enhance pathways for workers and young people to work in both countries, making it easier for our service companies and professionals to do business in other people's markets. Australian business will also have guaranteed access to opportunities across the UK's lucrative it's about $500 billion government procurement market. And as I've already mentioned, tariffs on wine, Australia's largest dutiable export to the UK by value, will be eliminated on entry into force. And that will remove customs duties worth about $43 million a year and provide Australian wine exporters with the opportunity to diversify and increase profitability. In terms of small and medium enterprise engagement, the agreement includes requirements for both countries to provide easy access to information that will assist SMEs interested in trading, investing or doing business with other countries. So that's another real positive in the agreement. And importers and consumers will also benefit from elimination of tariffs on British goods within 5 years of entry into force in the agreement. So that'll mean that popular consumer goods like cars, whiskey, biscuits, cosmetics, and business inputs such as specialised machinery and parts will become tariff-free, and that'll save Australians about $200 million annually. So in terms of benefits to New South Wales specifically, we certainly think that the UK FTA complements New South Wales's trade promotion and policy settings. And we think it will support increased two-way trade and investment and play to New South Wales' strengths in agriculture and digital tech. So I think among the top New South Wales exports that will benefit will of course be wine, subject to our discussion today, but also things like aluminium, beef, sheep meat, food preparations, wheat and nuts. And we also think the complementarities exist between UK initiatives on green trade and New South Wales critical minerals and high-tech metals strategy, which stands to position New South Wales as a major supplier of critical raw materials and rare earth elements to the UK, and also as an attractive investment destination strategic partner for the UK. More broadly, the agreement will also benefit New South Wales' strength in the provision of business services, including financial services, professional, scientific and technical services, property services and information, media and telecommunications. And New South Wales' highly skilled workers will benefit from new commitments on the recognition of professional qualifications that I mentioned earlier. Sydney's fintech sector will see expanded opportunities for cross-border provision for financial services and provisions to address behind-the-border barriers to financial services trade. Investment between New South Wales and UK will also receive a boost with ambitious market access commitments covering both portfolio and foreign direct investment. So as many of you know, the UK is one of the world's most active foreign direct investors, and then there's also return investment opportunities for Australia's growing super fund industry, which is increasingly looking for opportunities abroad. And these new opportunities will underpin existing investment links, including in defence, financial services, agriculture, manufacturing, critical minerals, technology and training. So turning to wine specifically, this audience is probably aware that total Australian wine exports are very large, valued about $3 billion in 2020, and 17% of those exports, valued about $502 million, went to the UK that year. And you're probably also aware that the previous tariffs were very, very high, as high as 26 pounds per hectolitre. So very significant tariffs have been eliminated. And that, as I mentioned before, equates to a saving around $43 million in custom duties a year, or an ad valorem equivalent of around 10%, and certainly provides good opportunities for players such as you to diversify and increase profitability. And we're really hoping that the agreement will I think boost what's already a pretty amazing export story. So the UK, as many of you would know, has been an important driver of recovery for the Australian wine industry. Its exports have been increasing very significantly, so I think by nearly 40% in 2020 compared with the year before. And it was already a top destination for exports by volume, but it's now also become Australia's largest export market by value. So it will certainly enable Australian wine exporters to compete on an equal footing with others that already enjoy duty-free access to the UK market, and it'll provide a competitive edge with over exporters that don't receive tariff-free treatment. So obviously the EU is the main one that already enjoys duty-free access. And some of you will also recall that when we announced the initial agreement in principle last year, we mentioned that Australia was also pursuing other proposals under the wine agreement, and those related to recognition of oenological practices and in-market processing. So regrettably, given the speed of negotiations with the UK, it was concluded very quickly. It wasn't possible to finalise those issues, but we're continuing to press the UK to consider amendments to the wine agreement, which would add to the benefits achieved under the free trade agreement for industry and consumers. And those discussions are being led by the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, and they're looking to hold discussions with the UK on the wine agreement and proposed amendments later this year. So that's still being very actively pursued. And of course, during the negotiations on 1 June 2022, the requirement for the VI1 certificate on wine imported into the UK was removed, which should also benefit Australian businesses exporting to the UK. I did want to touch briefly on alcohol duty reform. So many of you probably may not be aware, but normally internal, or certainly the usual course is internal tax regimes don't form part of free trade agreement negotiations. So the wine excise really is a separate issue from the free trade agreement, but it certainly won't affect the tariff elimination, which will remain a benefit for Australian producers relative to others, and it will, yeah. The other thing I just wanted to mention is, notwithstanding that it's not directly connected to the free trade agreement, we obviously recognise that it's an important issue for industry, and the Trade Minister has written to Rishi Sunak MP, he's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and highlighted industry's concerns and its intention to put forward a submission as part of the UK's consultation process. And we've received a response from the Chancellor of the Exchequer to the effect that the UK doesn't want to introduce a system that is burdensome on producers and importers, and that welcomes the Australian wine industry's views. The issue has also been taken up by the Agriculture Minister, and I know both the Agriculture Minister and Minister Tian have been in touch with the industry on this on a number of occasions, and encouraged the industry to continue to actively engage with the UK's consultation process. The only other thing I wanted to touch on very briefly was, in terms of free trade agreements, was our engagement with the UK's accession to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. So the parties to that agreement agreed to commence the UK's accession process back in June last year, and those discussions are ongoing. I mentioned that specifically just mainly because there's a wine and distilled spirits annex to the CPTPP, which, among other things, provides guidance on how specific minimum requirements for labels will be treated amongst parties to the TPP. So when the UK becomes a party to the TPP, you'll be able to benefit from that wine and spirits annex, and you should benefit also from the standardising label requirements that it introduces, and should reduce uncertainty for producers and exporters and lower the cost of business. So just in terms, just before I just in wrapping up, the agreement's entry into force, I'm sure, is uppermost in many people's minds. So the goal is for it to enter into force during the course of 2022. Ideally, we'd like to see that by 1 July 2022. But of course, that's contingent on a few things, not least how the election between now and then plays into the domestic ratification processes. But certainly, that's the ambition. That's what we're targeting. So yeah, thanks again for the opportunity, and yeah, appreciate the chance to talk to industry about the UK Free Trade Agreement.
Thanks very much, Brendan. And that ratification piece is certainly something that we're keeping a very close eye on here at the Chamber. And I know your colleague and the Chief Negotiator, Elizabeth Bowes, I can see has joined us on the call today. It's something that she and I have spoken about a bit in recent times. Yeah, the timing of democratic processes are certainly unfortunate at the moment, but the UK will also be undertaking its ratification process, and obviously us alongside it. They're kicking that off. Their Trade and Agriculture Commission, which is the first sort of step for them, will be reporting at the end of this month, and then the process will continue from there into the next couple of months after that. So I think 1 July might be a touch ambitious. Certainly by the end of the year, I think would be a great outcome. But thank you, Brendan, for that wide-ranging coverage of a whole range of different issues, and I'm sure there's plenty that we can unpick in the conversation from that. It's a great pleasure now to pass over to you, Angus, to tell us what you see as the real opportunities for business out of this, and where we can go, but also to set us up for some great conversation in about 10 minutes or so when you've had your say. So over to you, mate.
Thank you, David. I'm going to share my screen if I may.
Yeah, please do.
That. I hope everyone can see that now.
Yep, working perfectly now.
Firstly, I'm going to say it's so wonderful to talk about something positive in the wine industry in what's been quite a challenging couple of years, with everything from droughts to bushfires to smoke to floods to China. It's very good to talk about something that's positive. I may repeat a little bit of what Brendan's already said, but I'll hopefully do it with visuals as well, so it will reinforce that. I guess what I would like to do is to talk about three things. One is the reaction of the wine industry to the free trade agreement. The second thing is to talk a little bit about Australia's position in the UK in the wine markets and where we sit and where the opportunities lie. And the third thing is more specifically for those producers who are interested in exporting wine to the UK or thinking about exporting wine to the UK, how we can help them. And I say we, as in we, the New South Wales wine industry, the Investment New South Wales, and indeed the federal government through Wine Australia. So the New South Wales Wine Industry Association is the body that represents the growers and producers of New South Wales. We're there to provide information and a sense of belonging to our members, and have been around for many years, I guess since the 1800s as a vineyard association, and then more formally since 1994. In terms of our reaction to the free trade agreement, obviously we're delighted with the outcome. We're looking forward to being ratified. As Brendan said, it will save the Australian wine industry, and again, I'm a marketeer, so I like to round things up, around $50 million. And it will also put us in a strong position vis-a-vis our competitors. And again, I've mentioned there that South Africa and Chile are already joined the tariff-free agreement, and there is some discussions going on with New Zealand now, but it does put us in a stronger position, and it takes us up to the Europeans who are one of our competitors into that market. I won't talk through this slide, and actually Brendan talked a lot about it, but what it does do beyond just the price is gives us a reason to talk, and a simpler process to import or export our wines into the UK. It's much better for certification. It's much better for winemaking practices. And again, we've had problems in the past. So this really gives us a much, much stronger entry into market. And I think it's almost more important than the financial outcome for the industry, that it puts us in a better position to deal with the UK market. And also, I think the UK market will see Australia as a better trading partner going forward. The other thing that Brendan mentioned that I think is important is that the wine industry relies quite strongly on international labour, whether it be for vintage workers picking grapes or working in a winery, or indeed our very large wine tourism industry. And again, we're very excited and very keen to work under the new agricultural visa or any work-based visas that will enable younger people in particular from across the UK to come and work in the Australian agricultural and wine industry. So I'm going to show you a few numbers here. And again, I'm going to acknowledge Wine Australia for their assistance, and also IRI. And what we're looking here as some data from the off-trade in the United Kingdom until the 11th of January, which is the most recent capture of data that we've got. The off-trade captures about 65% of the total wine sold in the UK. It is a slight skew towards Australian wines, where we seem to do a little bit better in the off-trade than we do in the on-trade. And what I mean by the off-trade, just for those, is particularly the supermarkets, but also the retail shops in the UK, as opposed from the restaurants and hotels. But first, let's have a look at the Wine Australia data, and this is the most recent capture for Australia. Now, I guess the first looking at this document is a bit depressing. We've seen the numbers that came down from, as Brendan said, around $3 billion worth of exports 2 years ago to just over $2 billion worth of exports now. And really, there's probably four things that have happened, or three, and a fourth one on the horizon, that have really hurt us in that respect. The first and most significant one for the Australian wine industry is China, where our exports have gone down from $1.2 billion to, as you see there, about 200. So we've lost $1 billion right there in the China market. The second thing is COVID. And despite what I guess everyone talks about around the water cooler, actually COVID has meant that people have drunk less in volume and less in value. And we have seen since the years to 2020, we've seen a double-digit decline in consumption in the top 10 wine consumption markets in the world, the only exception being the US, which has shown decline, but not by as much. But I think the important thing to see on this slide is that the United Kingdom, which has historically been really a very important trading partner for the Australian wine industry, continues to be the number one market, both by volume and by value. And even though the numbers look relatively flat and even a little bit down there, as Brendan mentioned before, our growth really came very strongly in 2022. So those growth figures on the chart there are talking about the 12-month CAGR growth. But actually, if you put it over a number of years, we've seen tremendous growth back into the UK. And the other thing that we'll say about the UK, and I'll show it on future slides, is we're seeing a trading up in price into the more, I guess, premium wines in the Australian wine industry. So again, I don't know how well you can see this slide. Certainly on a phone, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. But what it does show is that Australia in the off-premise market is the absolute number one. Our market share of 23% is far more significant than our competitors. And again, and it shows the importance of the market to the Australian market. We sell 19.3 million cases worth $1.3 billion at an average price of about £5.88. The other thing worth saying in the UK is we do export a lot of our wine to the UK in bulk and bottle it over there for a number of cost reasons and quality reasons. And so it's an important market for us, both in bottled wine and in bulk wine. I guess for me, this is the most pleasing chart. And what we're seeing here is we're seeing growth at really that £7 average and above. And again, I worked in the UK for many years, and there was a very strong concertina of wine sold between sort of £4 and £6 in those days, which still looks relatively prevalent. But we're seeing good growth above £7. And what the pleasing thing for the Australian wine industry is we're seeing growth figures and percentage changes which are far in excess of the total market. So the Australian wine market at a premium end is growing faster than the rest of the market. You can see those numbers there, right across the 7 to 8, 8 to 9, etc., right up to the £20 and above, where we're seeing growth well in excess of the market. And again, that's significantly good thing for the Australian wine industry, where I think, you know, our future lies above, I guess, the very commercial end of the market, which is still important to us, but there are growth opportunities in premium. This chart just says, like the rest of the world, we sell across a number of different varietals. Obviously, for Shiraz, we've got 80% market share. We are the home of Shiraz globally, certainly in the UK, and we also trade very well in Chardonnay. But right across a number of varietals, we're very strong in the UK. And again, we're slightly stronger in red than white, but again, quite a good mix across them all. We're taking up some of the slack from New Zealand in Sauvignon Blanc, where they've had quite a difficult vintage in 2021. So a number of Australian exports of that variety have gone across into that market. Okay, so how can we help? And again, as I mentioned right up at the start, the we is the New South Wales wine industry, but we have a strong strategic partnership with New South Wales government, and indeed we also have a very strong trading relationship with our industry or government-owned industry wine division in Wine Australia. So in April of 2021, the New South Wales wine industry signed a memorandum of understanding with the state government, which gave us a large raft of support and agreement about how we work together, how we communicate together, how we deal across the various things, because we look after everything from grape growing right through to direct to consumer and to tourism. But most importantly for us, it gave us a support package for export, which was much needed by industry and puts us in a strong position to go out to markets like the UK and deal with some opportunities there. It would be fair to say that when we received this package, we put together an export committee, or we had an export committee, and we sat down, we said, what are our key markets? And it's very clear that the UK was seen as our absolute priority market for New South Wales, both then and indeed now. So Wine Australia has a very strong program, which in the last few years have been mainly virtual, so a lot of digital activity, but also virtual tastings where wine samples are sent out to key opinion leaders across markets, and those will continue to happen. But thankfully, we're also starting to see a bit of live activity, and there'll be some support through things like the London Wine Fair in June this year and a number of activities. The second part is the third-party support. So we have engaged some leading, I guess, export consultants in the wine industry. And as of late last night, we were interviewing for a UK wine ambassador that will help the New South Wales wine industry send our message. So basically having some feet on the ground in conjunction with our Investment New South Wales team over there. They will also work at coaching and mentoring and working with producers, again, who are already in market, but also those who are looking at the opportunities. And lastly, some in-market activity. The second big thing is that the New South Wales investment team has a number of programs, of which I guess the most significant and most important to the UK is the Going Global program. And that's a program that goes across a number of industries and supports those industries in their endeavours to export into the UK in the market. So it's a beverage program that the UK won at this point in time. And again, a number of our wine companies are already working in them. We support the Going Global program and will encourage New South Wales businesses and indeed New South Wales government to continue with this program. And lastly, and David mentioned it right up front, is that Investment New South Wales, or New South Wales government, has increased their team in the UK with a number of key appointments, including the Agent General, Stephen Cartwright, and he has a food and beverage expert that will be starting in the not too distant future that will help us. So again, we've got those feet on the ground and we've got a great opportunity. And I really feel as though from an export perspective into the UK, we've never been in a stronger position than we are right now. So what can people do? We've got a number of areas of support. So I'd encourage my colleagues out there who are interested in exporting to the UK or are already doing this to make sure that we know who you are. You've got our website there. We put a newsletter out every couple of weeks. There's my email address. We have encouraged you to make yourself known to us, and we will be coming out to you in the next weeks and months with some support, some further information about support. The last thing I'm going to say, and again, Brendan did mention it, and this is completely separate to the free trade agreement, but Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs has proposed a duty increase, which is quite detrimental to the wine industry in comparison to the beer and cider industry. Again, we are communicating through a various number of bodies to object to this increase. However, I will say that even if it does go through, our advantages from the free trade agreement will still be there, and in comparison to some of our competitors, we'll still be in a strong position. Thank you very much. Cheers, David.
Thank you very much, Angus. And thank you for stopping sharing your screen as well. That was terrific, and I think it gives a really good overview between the two presentations of where we've got to. It's terrific to hear there's $43 million that's back in the pockets of either consumers, if it's a discount at that end, or in the pockets of producers at this end, or a share of any which way you might want to cut that, which is terrific. I note there are lots of moving parts, and Brendan talked about the wine treaty being still looked at and some further movement potentially there. But we have some time for Q&A, but I'm going to ask some questions of Brendan and Angus before we get underway. And Angus, I wanted to touch on a couple of points that you made, which I thought were really interesting. And I know that your numbers were looking at the snapshot prior up to the 11th, I think it was, of January. That must have been just after the Sydney Test finished, and all those vignerons that I saw at the cricket, we got back to work and finished off those numbers. But
it was also the day I caught COVID too, David.
Oh, well, look, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm hoping you're fully recovered.
Yes, indeed.
But one of the things that's always been a key interest, particularly in the UK market, is how do we shift the needle from the very commercial product that we've traditionally been known for. Good for a barbie, pick up an Australian white on, from the supermarket on the way to the local barbie in the UK. How do we shift the needle on that premium journey? And I know with interest that you said that you have seen that in the more recent data that's not formalised yet. Could you tell us a little bit about what you've seen that's worked and any stories, anecdotal stories you might have of why that's happening and what people have done to help accelerate that journey?
So firstly, I'm going to say that the supermarket channel is still very important to the Australian wine industry and quite frankly will be for the ongoing future. What I think the challenge has been is that with the costs of things like water and labour, we can no longer really compete with the likes of South Africa and South America and some of the Italian wines at that really commercial end of the market, around that £4, £5 market. So what we've seen over, I guess, the recent years and maybe in the last 10 to 15 years is that gradual movement up the scale in pricing. And again, what I think it's about is about being able to tell stories about Australian wine that resonate with consumers over there, to move away from the generic, in some ways, the sunshine in a bottle, and tell stories about what happens in Orange and what happens in the Hunter and what happens in Tumbarumba, and some stories about winemakers, some stories about vineyards, some stories about vignerons. And again, I think we're starting to see a lot of that. The other thing that is important to us and will be super important to us as both the UK and Australia come out of COVID is the on-premise channel, where historically the Australian wine industry has been very much rooted in the supermarkets and the off-premise channel, with a lot more focus going to the on-premise channel, and that's where premium wines are built. And again, one of the things that we're doing with our MOU support is supporting an ambassador that will help us, and we interviewed a lovely chap last night who was in the on-premise trade, who will really be significant about bringing that story to life of quality Australian wines or New South Wales wines right across that the UK on-premise channel.
Where was tap on the shoulder for me, Angus? I'm sure
right.
I could have done a great job.
I'm sure you could have too.
Promoting New South Wales wine. That's got to be the job of the decade.
That's right.
Surely.
That's right.
Stephen Cartwright might give up the Agent General's role and step across for that one. Absolutely, it sounds like a wonderful opportunity.
Good.
And it's great to see that real support that you're providing, that New South Wales government are providing to really help promote and really drive that narrative. And so that's terrific. Brendan, I want to come back to you and talk a little bit more about what the key considerations when you're thinking, and part of this, I guess, will play out into what happens next with Australia and the EU as well. And I know that you mentioned you're not on that negotiation, so it kind of feels good. I can ask you and you can give an independent but government-focused view, I guess, if that makes sense. We're not holding you to that this would be government policy in any way, shape or form, but as somebody who's an informed negotiator, do you think that that the Australia-UK deal will help open up markets into Europe in time when that FTA comes together? And did you think about that when you were negotiating the Australia-UK FTA in terms of a lot of people land stock in the UK for distribution elsewhere?
So, look, thanks for the question. I think the simplest answer to that really is that the best boon or the best opportunity for getting into the EU market is going to be the EU free trade agreement. So you mentioned landing wine in the UK and sending it on to into the EU. So the agreement with the UK doesn't deal with that situation. It really only deals with Australian exports into the UK that are originating in Australia. It doesn't really help with access to the European Union market, and it'll be the European Union agreement that will need to deal with issues like the circumstances in which Australian wine can pass through the UK and move into the to the European Union. I know from secondhand information that, well, not having been directly involved in the negotiations, but certainly the EU does tend to be quite conservative in terms of what operations are permitted to be undertaken on products outside of its FTA partners. So I suspect that they will be taking a fairly conservative approach in terms of wine that comes from Australia and moves through the UK and goes into the EU free trade agreement. So yeah, so in short, that's all I could really say about it at the moment. But I know those sorts of concerns and issues have been raised in before, and I know that we've referred at least a couple of people to our EU negotiators so that they're aware of that issue and aware of industry interest in that issue. But it's really an issue that needs to be resolved in the context of the European Union negotiations.
Thanks, Brendan. And I guess actually the first question, I'm going to turn to it now because I think it really ties into this. We've heard a little bit about free ports in the UK, and I don't know, I know your job's negotiating the good side, but I'm wondering, do these free ports, Angus talked about some of our wine gets shipped in bulk and then bottled in the UK. Would a free port arrangement allow that sort of onward movement without too many dramas, or is it still yet to be seen?
It's yet to be seen. So it's not something that is governed by the UK free trade agreement. So it's something that would be subject to the agreement with the European Union, because that's the ultimate destination of the product in this situation. So if we're shipping wine to the UK and operations are being undertaken on the wine in the UK and then it's going to the European Union, then that trade that trade will be governed by the EU agreement. And I'm not sure that a free port in the UK would solve the problem, but in the end, it would depend on the precise parameters of the EU Australia free trade agreement rather than the UK free trade agreement.
Brendan, you're a fine,
quite conservative when it comes to movement through non-parties into the European Union and what operations it will permit on wine or other products in those circumstances.
That's a very broad, straight bat you've just played to that one, Brendan. Well played, well played. And there is still some way to go in some of these areas. Brendan, I'm going to ask you one more question before I go back to Angus with the next one. But what specifically do you think will be negotiated between the Department of Agriculture around the wine treaty later in the year? What are the specific parts that we're hoping to see movement on? So
the things that industry came to us with during the negotiations were, about oenological practices and in-market processing. So things like coupage, transformation from one product category to another, sweetening, turning wine into sparkling wine in the UK, those sorts of issues. So we did push the issue quite hard with the UK during the free trade agreements, but as I mentioned before, we weren't able to reach agreement on those issues. Obviously, we see benefits in getting an outcome on those issues, not only for Australia but also for the UK. Noting that in that case, a lot of those operations could certainly be performed in the UK and would benefit UK industry, create jobs in the UK, and those sorts of things. So that's the sort of things we talked about during the negotiations, but in the end, we weren't able to reach agreement on those in time for the conclusion of the agreement. But we're quite fortunate in the sense that we do have an existing wine agreement with the UK. So there is an ongoing opportunity to take up these issues in the context of the wine agreement. And that's certainly what our colleagues at the Department of Agriculture are doing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brendan. Angus, Amy from Tamburlaine up there in the Hunter. When are we likely to hear what funding, if any, will be available to assist in travel and attending in person? such events? You mentioned the London Wine Show, for example, for New South Wales wineries.
It's a good question, and I know I've got an email in my inbox from Amy that I need to reply to. But basically, what we've done is we've sat down as there's an export committee, and they've said what are the things that we want to work on, and again a number of things, and obviously the in-market stuff is absolutely critical. And again, I think there's nothing like shoe leather to really grow the industry, to look someone in the eye. The group felt this year that the London Wine Trade Fair might be a bit too early, i.e. June, but I think there's been a number of people who are shown some interest, so we'll come back to you and say these are the sort of things that we can support you with. But I will say that there's also already a number of packages out there through things like the Export Development Marketing Grants, and New South Wales also has some export grants that are available to support activities right now and going forward. But in specific to Amy's question, we will come out and look at our website to make sure that we get there and get our newsletter. We will come out with a very detailed list of activities and how we can support the industry going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Angus. I'd like to ask a question, probably of both of you, but Brendan, I might start back with you around workforce, because one of the things that's been highlighted in the FTA announcement and where it's gone since the signing, but in fact was part of the original agreement in principle back in June of last year, was this change to the working holiday maker visa, where in the previous iterations, I think still in the iteration we've got now, for now, there was a requirement to do either regional or rural work, and obviously seasonal picking is great fodder for that sort of extension component to people's visas when they are working holiday makers here in Australia. And I know that there's an agricultural visa that's been proposed and that is working through. But Brendan, could you sort of give us just a little bit of framing of how that fits together?
Sure. So I basically, I'm not the movement and natural persons expert, but certainly my understanding of it is that for young people, within 2 years of entry into force of the agreement, they'll be eligible to participate in working holiday opportunities, and the age will be raised from 30 to 35 years, and stays will be allowed for up to three years. And UK nationals, like Australians in the UK, will have more freedom to choose where they work. So I think they're the main changes that came out of the movement of natural persons outcomes under the agreement. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's great. So Angus, I guess the question then is, what's the industry going to do to make it an interesting travel experience to be here for vintage? Because I know, as you know, I know plenty of people in the industry, and plenty of them like to travel to the other side of the world, particularly encouraging the younger members of the industry to get over and come back and be part of that exchange of knowledge, of information. Whether that, I don't know that we send a lot of people for vintages in the UK at the moment. I think there are some other markets we might go to first. But what are we doing about attracting where's industry's thoughts about how we're going to tackle this and encourage younger people to still participate in those vintage opportunities in particular?
So firstly, let me say we're delighted with some of the changes that happened to the working holiday visa. So the increase of the age from 30 to 35, and also the 3-year limit on the visa. We've relied very heavily on some of those working visas for people for a number of times, but obviously in the last 2 years, we've had to do without it, and we've worked with things like the Pacific Labour Scheme and the Seasonal Work Program. But really, we haven't been able to replace those staff, and quite frankly, in regional New South Wales in particular, we've got real challenges with staff, not only in the agricultural side, but also in the tourism side. And it's not as simple as finding the people, because we've got to find them somewhere to sleep and a number of those things, which is the challenge. But we are working with a number of people to rectify that. And some of the ways that we'll do that is we will be talking to universities, we'll be talking to schools over there to say, if you're going to take a gap year, here's some opportunities and here are some avenues. We're working with the larger regions and the larger producers to say, what can we do directly with you? Can we ship can we get a group of ex-people who want to come over from the UK for a experience to work together? So there's a lot of things, but it's not an easy situation. The last two vintages, including the vintage we're having right now, we're severely short-staffed, both from an agricultural and, quite frankly, from a tourism perspective.
Thanks, Angus. And I look forward to seeing, I don't know, slip and slides down between the vineyards, all sorts of new activities for people to do between picking. Angus, another question here from Charlie from the Mayfield Vineyard in Orange, interested in exploring the UK market but have never done so. What would be the first thing for them to do to start doing that from here, and what do New South Wales Wine New South Wales do to assist in that?
Great, so good question, and hello, Charlie. Good to see you electronically anyway. So what I think the opportunity is in this situation, if you're in the new to market, I guess what you need to do is a little bit of research to say, what is the offer that you want to take to that market? So it might not be your entire portfolio, it might be at a certain price point, and start to work out what you can put together that puts you in a position to say, this is going to put me in a strong position to go into an export market like the UK with a good product at a good price. Now, there are a number of areas you can have a look at, like the Wine Australia website, which I think has a set of fantastic tools and export market guides to say, what is the UK like? What you need to do with your labelling, what you need to do with your regulations. But I think it's more about getting that story of your portfolio and your pricing and your product together. Now, again, I think Charlie's already done it, but he needs to make sure that that he lets us know that we're there. So we're going to use this third-party consultant to come and work with and coach and mentor people like Mayfield if they want to get into the UK, and really work with them hand in hand to say, here's all the tools, but more importantly, get out there and have an experience and come back and say, look, this worked and this didn't work. What did I do wrong? What can I do better? And I think there's an iterative process. It's not simple. Sometimes you might get a lucky break where you get a big opportunity fall in your lap, but quite often it takes a little bit of work and a little bit of time. So you've got to be prepared to invest that time. At the moment, there's a lot of support financially available, and there's also a lot of support in terms of information and I guess coaching and mentoring. So I'd encourage Charlie to do that.
Brilliant, thanks, Angus. And I think that's a really important point. And we're here at the Chamber, whether it's us, whether it's Angus, whether it's the Investment New South Wales team, there are actually quite a lot of people with resources that can help you. And feel free to reach out to any of us to give you that support. We all know each other. We all play well with each other. We'll all tell each other that you're trying to do it. And if there are things that one of us can do that the others can't, we'll always help try and push that forward. So main thing is, just reach out, make sure that we know we can help. We just need to know that we need to help. And then we can make that an easier journey. I've got a couple more questions that have come in. I'm just going to touch on one which I sort of touched on a little bit earlier about free ports. Just want to let everybody know that Grant Murray from GPS Currency Risk Management, he's from the northeast of England. He's actually, I think, in Australia at the moment. He's come over. He's actually going to be working out of Sydney going forward. But he knows a lot about these free ports and the Teesside one up in the northeast in particular. So if anybody wants some help, just let us know and we'll put you in touch with Grant and see if he can help you out on the details there. The last question I've got here is from John Bell. Given the economics of bulk wine shipping, how do smaller, lower volume producers take advantage of the FTA? Angus, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I think, funnily enough, it's almost more advantageous to be a lower volume producer in this FTA. The financial benefit of the removal of tariff is somewhere between 25, 30 cents a bottle. But I think the advantages is much bigger in that I think that if I break it down to it simpler, that the British wine market will want to deal with the Australian wine market in a much stronger way than they probably have in the recent past. I think in some ways they'll go a little bit away from their European colleagues and look to their Commonwealth friends and we should be standing right there at the front of the door. The exchange rate is not painful at this point in time, so I think we're in a relatively strong position to go out there. And again, we're seeing, as I showed in my slides, albeit probably in very small font, that we're seeing some really good growth in that premium end of the market, and I really think that will play strongly for the lower volume producers, particularly at the premium end.
Excellent. I think you've covered that pretty well. And there's one last question that I'm going to sneak in before the end. And I don't know whether you'll get this. This is a one that I wasn't expecting, Brendan. So you'll have to forgive me. This is a question certainly without notice. Does the free trade agreement include wine in kegs for on-premise tap dispensing in 20 and 30 litre kegs?
So look, I haven't got the tariff schedule open in front of me, but I would say yes, but I would encourage the person asking the question to jump on our website and have a look. We've got a free trade agreement portal on there, so if you know the tariff code for the line, you can double check on the free trade agreement portal and confirm for that specific product what the tariff treatment for it is. But certainly, I would be surprised if it wasn't eliminated on entry into force. But without sort of checking the specific tariff line, I wouldn't want to sort of give you a categoric answer, but it can certainly be checked on our website.
I won't give a categoric answer either, but I know that the last time I spoke to Elizabeth, we were talking about the things that aren't. And I think she said there was chicken and eggs. And I think the fact that we're not exporting either means that we won't know which one will come first yet. But we'll get to chickens and eggs at another time. I think almost everything else is covered. So I think your supposition is probably right, Brendan, but certainly...
I'm surprised if it wasn't covered. And there was a handful of lines that were not a handful. There was a certain number of lines that were phased, but I don't recall any of them being in the beverages area. So I'd be very surprised if it wasn't duty free on entry into force.
Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Brendan and Angus, for your insights this afternoon. That's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it. I'm very sorry that I'm not drinking the product yet, but it is only 4 o'clock, and perhaps in an hour I might be able to wrap my lips around a nice glass of something nice. But thank you very much, both of you, for sharing your insights and your expertise. My great pleasure now to pass over to my great friend Carla Lampe to give us a vote of thanks. And she's the acting executive director for Trade, Investment and International at Investment New South Wales. To give her a proper title, since I butchered that earlier. Sorry, Carla. But over to you.
Thanks, David. And, you know, they say that it's midday somewhere around the world, so I feel like you might not need to wait too much longer. But look, thank you so much for you all for joining today. The New South Wales government and the former Deputy Premier announced our trade statement about 5 months ago now. And in that, there was an aim to double our exports from 96 billion to 200 billion by 2031. You saw in Angus's presentation that the export of wine has dropped over the past year. And in fact, our exports have dropped by 10 billion in the last year. So we've got a doubly high target to achieve in a shorter amount of time. So I guess it's instruments like this, like the UK FTA, that are going to assist us to actually achieve those targets. I want to congratulate Brendan and also Elizabeth that I saw on the call today. It's been a mammoth effort. I know that you were negotiating this online, which for the people on this call, and particularly David, I know you know that well, is really hard with the UK time zone. So well done on doing that. The New South Wales government is investing really heavily in our relationship with the UK. You've seen this, Angus talked about it. We've opened up our new office. We've got our Agent General. We've got Paul Webster, who at this, during this week, we'll be hosting our first in-person wine tasting in 2 years in London, showcasing New South Wales wine. So we are here to help. We have an office, we have people on the ground in the UK, but we also have people on the ground across New South Wales. And I know, Charlie, you were asking a question before about who to get in touch with. We've got people based in Sydney, but actually, more importantly, for the purposes of this conversation, based around New South Wales, export advisors that are here to help you. Please reach out to us, or we'll share our details with you after this. We are really keen to help. Amy, you asked about grants for exporting overseas. Unfortunately, our export assistance grant has just finished up. We expended all the $10 million, but we're looking at what the next, what the next iteration of that looks like. So, again, for you, keen to get in touch. I know this is not UK specific, but for those of you on the call, I feel like I've got a captive audience. We are hosting a Wine to the United States program. Sorry, David, close your ears. And Angus, it's with Wine Australia, not the New South Wales Wine Association, but I feel like we're all in it together, so that's okay. So look, if you're keen to get into the US market, please come talk to us. Of course, if you're keen to do business in the UK market, my colleagues Tess and Nicolene are also on the call. We will share our details after this, and we look forward to staying in touch. We're here to help businesses access new markets and new customers. We can help with the market piece, but we can't help unless we've got the businesses to work with. So that's where you come into play. So on that note, thank you. We look forward to working to you. And David, back over to you.
Thank you, Carla. I nearly forgot to unmute myself, and then that would have really created some hassles. But thank you very much, Carla. It's been terrific to work with the Investment New South Wales team. They've got a great group of people. I know Paul Webster well. I'm sure he'll very much enjoy the wine tasting this week. And it's great to hear that they're back to face-to-face events over there. We're looking forward actually to a wine tasting next week with our friends at Brokenwood. And we'll look forward to doing more of those with others who might like to join us around New South Wales at various times in the future as well. Could I thank you again for sponsoring not only this session, but the series. It's a great partnership and some really great people who know the UK market exceptionally well that can support you both here in terms of Tess and the team and Carla's team here, but also Paul Webster and the team there. Under Stephen Cartwright in the Agent General's office. There's some people who have been working in this space for an awfully long time and will be really valuable partners. So make sure you avail yourself of that support. Brendan, Angus, thank you again to both of you for your time. Carla and the team, thank you again. And to everybody else for joining us this afternoon, thank you very much. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, David. Thanks, team.
Bye. Bye all.